is an old story, the kind told in low voices and candlelight, the kind traced in ink in the margin of old books, forgotten, a man whose name has become legend, but whose fate was never his own. Hercules. Shall we call him Heracles? The Greeks sure did. To them, he was not merely a hero, but a paradox, the strongest of men, yet bound by suffering. His name itself, Heracles, meant the glory of Hera, a bitter irony if you know his story, for no mortal has ever suffered more in her wrath. The Romans, centuries later, would take him for their own, calling him Hercules, transforming his tale from a tragedy of penance to one of triumph. They built statues of him in their forums, inscribed his deeds in their histories, and marched beneath his image, believing that strength alone was enough to make a man worthy of the gods. But that's not true, is it? And that's why the Greeks knew better. His story was never a simple one, never owned by a single voice. It was chiseled in stone, painted onto vases, whispered in the halls of Delphi where the gods themselves listened. Homer, in his famous Iliad, speaks of him in passing, a shade among the dead. Hesiod, in his Theogony, traces his divine lineage. Wopindar sings his praises in the Victory Odes. But it was Euripides who stripped away the veneer of heroism, who showed us the man behind the legend. Flawed, haunted, seeking absolution where none could be found. And so his story endured in temples, tragedies, in the minds of philosophers who saw in him a lesson that strength, untempered by wisdom, is no virtue at all. Speak his name, and the world conjures a tighten its mind-eye, broad-shouldered, thunder-hearted, adorned in the spoils of his victories. They see him with his lion's belt, the club, resting heavy in his hands, a warrior carved from bronze and fire. But myths are liars, and statues do not bleed. He was not always a hero. Once he was a boy named Alcides, son of Amphitryon, mortal king of Thebes, and Alcmene, a woman whose misfortune it was to be loved by a god. Zeus. The name alone commands the sky, the king of Olympus, breaker of oaths, father of bastards. It is said he descended from his throne in disguise, cloaked in the form of Amphitryon himself, whispering stolen words into Alcmene's ear. And that night, stretched longer than time allowed, for Zeus bent the very fabric of it, weaving his deception along 3 days and nights, ensuring that when Alcanes was born, he would not be wholly of this earth. And Hera, the ever watchful, the ever wrathful, saw everything. She saw and she waited. For the gods do not punish their own, no. It is the children who bear the weight of their father's sins. Even in his crib, she tried to snuff him out. The serpents slithered through the dark, their scales brushing against cold marble, twin whispers of death. But the child did not cry. He did not fear. He reached out with his small hands, and in one great squeeze, he made the world understand. This is no ordinary infant, and he would be no ordinary man. He grew in the halls of Thebes, tutored by those who shaped the very foundation of Greek thought. From Linus, he learned the lyre, though his hands were better suited for war than for music. From Autolycus, he learned wrestling. From Eurytus, archery. And from Castor, the art of battle, the measured discipline of the sword. It was a childhood written in bruises and torn knuckles, bloodied lips. There was no place in this world for the son of a god to be soft. Yet, strength alone is never enough. Plato once wrote that the measure of a man is not in his power, but in his ability to wield it with wisdom. And Aristotle warned of those who possessed might without reason, for they were beasts in human form. Hercules, he was never granted the luxury of temperance. His blood was not the still waters of a scholar's mind, but a river that raged, that tore through the world with unrelenting force. You see, Hercules, he took to war as easily as breathing. He led Theban armies to victory, fought with the might of 10 men, crushed enemies beneath his heel, and returned home. Feast sung in his honor. The world already whispered of his divinity, of the fire in his veins, and yet he wanted nothing of Olympus. His life was mortal, stitched together in the simple joys of earthbound men. A wife, Megara, a home, children, who ran to him laughing, unafraid of the power he wielded. But the gods are cruel, and Hera had not forgotten. In the dark of night, that's when the madness took him. The Greeks, they call that madness Lysa, a frenzy gifted by the gods, a thing that devoured reason whole. And when he awoke from the haze, the house was quiet, too quiet. His hands stained with the ruin of his own making. You see, Megara, she lay cold upon the ground, their children, still, silent, small. Grief is the thing that bends men, but guilt, it shatters them. What is a hero after all, if not a man who has lost everything? What is redemption, if not the shadow of regret? And so he wandered through fields where the wheat bent in reverence to his passing, through cities where men whispered his name, now not in awe, but in fear. He sought absolution. Though there was none to be given, until at last he stood before the great temple of Apollo, before the oracle of Delphi. His voice little more than a rasp in the stillness of that sacred place. Tell me how to make it right, he begged, and the oracle, bound by the words of the gods, answered, Go to King Eurystheus, submit yourself to rule. For 10 years you shall serve him, and only then will your soul be cleansed. But it was a lie, a trick of Olympus, a game played by gods with nothing better to do. Eurystheus, a cousin to Hercules, was a king of weak will, a puppet to Hera herself. And he did not demand 10 years of service. He demanded 12 flavors, each one methodically crafted to break him, to undo him, to drown him beneath the weight of the impossible. And yet he did not refuse. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was fate. Or perhaps Hercules knew, in the quietest part of himself, that this was always how his story would be told. Not as a man of peace, not as a king, but as a thing forged in fire, beaten and shaped by suffering. Beaten until there was nothing left but the steel of his will. And so, the first trial began.